they are dying of hunger because it is their fault, because they breed like rabbits. These words were said by Winston Churchill, whom Britain sees as a god. These words were said in a joking manner towards millions of people who died due to famine, who were little kids, women of all ages, men of all ages, and animals. In 1943, while the world was consumed by the fires of global war, another horror unfolded, not in isolation or as a force of nature, but as a deeply human tragedy, born of political will, of imperial design, and of those in power who saw bodies as chess pieces and livelihoods as expendable. Imagine a world where grain is shipped out, boats are destroyed, and food is weaponized, all in the name of military strategy. A world where Winston Churchill, often idolized as a wartime hero, dismissively commented that Bengalis were breeding like rabbits and asked, "Why isn't Gandhi dead yet?" Now picture the irony. While grain sailed to Britain and to armies fighting Nazis, mouths in Bengal screamed in empty agony. A denial policy ordered the destruction of 46,000 country boats and the seizure of rice stores, forcing fishermen to watch their lifeline vanish. Meanwhile, the Famine Inquiry Commission chose silence over judgment, blaming population growth rather than admitting colonial policy that had strangled Bengal's food supply. This isn't a story of misplaced blame. It's a study of calculated decisions, a horribly calculated decision, when propaganda barred even the word famine from newspapers. The statesman broke the spell, publishing haunting images of the starving, sparking outrage only after months of silence. More than 2 million people died, corpses clogged the streets, and the collapse of society played out in real time. And yet, even in the rubble, the word turned and history forgot. The 1943 Bengal famine was not just an agriculture disaster, but a man made tragedy rooted in political calculation. In the midst of World War II, British colonial leaders prioritized military strategy and imperial power over saving lives. The result was catastrophic. By some estimates, 3 to 4 million Bengalis starved to death from starvation, malaria, and other diseases aggravated by wartime policies. Starvation and its agonies were hidden under strict wartime censorship. Indeed, an official in London later admitted that Bengal's crisis was kept out of the news while British India became the only famine in modern Indian history not to occur as a result of serious drought. For victims in Calcutta and the countryside, the famine was both immediate horror and a profound betrayal. Famine relief was withheld even while food sources continued to flow out of Bengal. The contrast between the human cost and the cold policy choices is stark. Contemporary reports and historians confirms that the British officials destroyed boats and rice stocks in coastal Bengal to keep them from Japanese forces, which was a denial policy that left entire villages without food or means to fish. Bengal did not actually lack rice in 1943. The province or the state actually had a surplus of food, but London deliberately kept relief ships away. Even when the US and Canada offered emergency grain specifically for Bengal, the British government flatly refused in effect because the political decisions and war imperatives overrode any humanitarian impulse. The Government of India's Famine Inquiry Commission report described Bengal as a land of rice growers and rice eaters. Rice dominated the agriculture output of the province, accounting for nearly 88% of its arable land use and 75% of its crops. Overall, Bengal produced one third of India's rice, more than any other single state. Rice accounted for 75 to 85% of daily food consumption, with fish being the second major source, of course, for protein, supplemented by small amounts of wheat. There are three seasonal rice crops in Bengal. By far, the most important is the winter crop of Amman rice, sown in May and June and harvested in November and December. It produces about 70% of the total annual crop. Crucially, the shortfall in rice production in 1942 occurred during the all-important Amman harvest. Bengal had a population of 60 million in an area of 77,442 square miles, according to a 1941 census. Over the same period, India's population as a whole increased by 37%. The whole economy was almost solely agrarian, which means based only on agriculture. But agriculture productivity was among the lowest in the world. No later than the first quarter of the 20th century, Bengal began to experience an acute shortage of such land, leading to a chronic and growing shortage of rice. Its inability to keep pace with rapid population growth changed it from a net exporter of food grains to a net importer. Imports were a small portion of the total available food crops. However, it did little to alleviate problems of food supply. According to a chemist and a professor in Calcutta's Medical College, Chunilal Bose estimated in 1930 that both the ingredients and the small amount of food in the Bengali diet made it among the least nutritious in India. Water provided the main source of transport during rainy seasons, and throughout the year in areas such as vast delta of the coastal southeastern Sundarbans, river transport was integral to Bengal's economy, an irreplaceable factor in the production and distribution of rice. The Japanese campaign for Burma set off an exodus of more than half of the 1 million Indians from Burma for India. The flow began after the bombing of Rangoon, and for months thereafter, desperate people poured across the borders, escaping into India through Bengal and Assam. On 26th of April 1942, all Allied forces were ordered to retreat from Burma into India. Military transport and other supplies were dedicated to military use and unavailable for use by the refugees. The number of refugees who successfully reached India totaled at least 500,000. Tens of thousands died along the way. In later months, 70 to 80% of these refugees were afflicted with diseases such as dysentery, smallpox, malaria, or cholera. The refugees' arrival created an increased demand for food, clothing, and medical aid, further straining the resources of the state, which was already in the worst position possible. After the fall of Burma, unskilled laborers from Bengal and nearby states were employed by military contractors, particularly for the construction of American and British airfields. Hundreds of thousands of American, British, Indian, and Chinese troops arrived in the state, straining domestic supplies and leading to scarcities across wide ranges of daily necessities. The general inflationary pressures of wartime economy caused prices to rise rapidly across the entire spectrum of goods and services. In March 1942, British India was expecting Japanese invasion via the eastern border of Bengal. The British military launched a preemptive, two-pronged scorched earth initiative in eastern and coastal Bengal. Its goal was to deny the expected invaders from Japan to get the access to food supplies, transport, and other resources. First, a denial of food and transport was carried out, especially the denial of rice. John Herbert issued an urgent directive in late March 1942, immediately requiring stocks of paddy and other food items to be removed or destroyed in these districts. However, evidence that fraudulent and coercive practices by the purchasing agents removed far more rice than officially recorded, not only from the designated districts, but also in unauthorized areas, which acted like wind on wildfire to make the already worst condition the worst. Britain's military planners ordered the burning or sinking of ships and the seizure of coastal rice stocks so that Japanese cannot acquire them. In practice, this destroyed the livelihoods of Bengal's fishermen and farmers, leaving their scorched earth food sources totally obliterated. Hunger became inevitable once boats and grain were confiscated. Bengal continued to ship rice to feed British troops and civilians even as its own people starved. The province exported tens of thousands of tons of rice to Europe and did not redirect Australian wheat bound for Britain. Remarkably, London declined to reroute international aid. Britain turned down more than 1 million tons of American Canadian wheat requested for Bengal. Winston Churchill's government viewed the crisis through the lens of imperial power. Churchill is documented as blaming the victims themselves. He reportedly quipped that the famine was the Indians' fault for breeding like habits, and then even joked that he regretted not seeing Mahatma Gandhi among the dead. Such dehumanizing comments reveal the contempt and callousness with which some British leaders treated Bengal's suffering. Even after the famine finally eased in 1944, thanks to the bountiful harvest and belated relief, its lessons went largely unheeded. The horrific events in Bengal should have been a warning about how political calculus can create a humanitarian catastrophe. Yet history has shown again and again that humanity often fails to learn from past mistakes. In more recent crises, similar patterns appear. For example, as aid agencies noted during the 2022 famine in East Africa, governments and donors knew how to prevent mass starvation, but again chose inertia over action. A relief report warned that these leaders have failed to apply lessons from the past, so much so that history is set to repeat itself on even larger scale. This cycle of forgetting is tragic. The Bengal famine taught that starving people cannot wait while food is used as a bargaining chip for politics or war. It showed that powerful figures, from colonial viceroys to modern autocrats, may sacrifice the weak if it serves their end. Yet too often, when the alarms ring, those in power respond not with urgent aid, but with denial and delay. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked this essay, please click the like button and support the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day. Bye.